Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Oh, now let's give a warm welcome to our main speaker, Mike G.
Oh, yes. Think of them in their underwear. Is that what you said? My name is Mike. I'm an alcoholic. That shouldn't be much of a stretch. I do that all the time anyway. My long-suffering wife is sitting there. Her nickname for me is Slut Pig. So... for which I am not at all embarrassed or ashamed. I'm rather proud of it, actually. I was looking at the paper this morning. For anybody who missed this, and you have an alcoholic mind, I want you to start worrying about this now. A space object may hit Earth in 2030, astronomers say. Apparently, in the year 2030, there's one chance in 500 that a asteroid is going to hit the Earth. In the 1 in 500 chance, and it will be 100 times the size of the bomb at Hiroshima. So if you're an alcoholic, you can start worrying about that tonight. Just wanted to point that out to you in case you need something to worry about it. If you have a mind like mine. When, by the way, was the last time you heard the expression Y2K? This time last year, everybody was worried about all of that, and fear, blah, 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 but now... So I guess that's, if you like to worry, go ahead. My ambition, I want to thank Bara, wherever she is, for inviting me here tonight. She's not here tonight, of course. This is the night she doesn't, something about her father's birthday, which is a pretty lame excuse if you ask me. But so if she's listening to the tape, I want you to understand how disappointed I am that you're not here. And I'm really tired of people talking about, like Chuck C's tapes and, Clancy and, all these people. They buy their tapes and they take them with them on trips through the desert. So my ambition with this talk tonight, I want to make the charts, the AA charts with this tape. So I'm really going to try real hard to make this a very famous talk so you can all listen to me on your way to Kansas City or something, on your Walkman, or walk person. I was at a meeting the other day and a woman said, quote, I wrote it down, she said, referring to the meeting, says, you can't put into words what's said around here. So I will attempt tonight to put into words what's said around here. I want to welcome the newcomers, by the way, and I'll just inform you that there's no law that says you have to identify yourself as a newcomer. There's no rule anywhere in the AA literature that says that. If you don't identify, you don't feel like identifying, don't. It's the only part of the country where they have this thing that make it sound like it's mandatory. Other places, I've been in meetings all over the place, and it's a local custom. It's, when I lead an AA meeting, it's voluntary. If you wish to do it, fine. But you don't have to. If you're sitting in the room here and you're a newcomer and you didn't identify yourself, that's the person I'm talking to tonight. I want to welcome you. You don't have to declare yourself for Jesus. You can sit in the back there and just, blend in. You don't have to do any of that crap, all that ritualistic garbage that we do around here. You don't have to do any of that. I just welcome you here. You don't even have to stop drinking to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Instead, the only requirement is a desire to stop drinking. So if you have a desire to stop drinking, you're a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that is a requirement for membership. That's the only one we have, but it is one. So, I welcome you. Everybody else drinks water. I like cherry Coke. Water bottles. I get real... I promised a number of people, different people, kind of a thematic approach to this thing tonight. I don't know what I told some people I was going to talk about the 13th step. I told other people I was going to bitch about the way the traditions are being violated all over the place. And I told somebody else I was going to the topic tonight was how to deal with assholes in sobriety. So I promised my wife I'd be nice. So we'll see if we can achieve all that. Maybe that'll get me on the charts. First of all, if you are new, as I said, I welcome you, and there's something I, as an old-timer around here, ask you in return when you start prattling about how grateful you are, which usually takes, about second or third week. I would like you to, since you're feeling so grateful, what I'd like you to do is read our literature. I'd like you to learn about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd like you to learn about our traditions, which are in fact being violated all over the place. I'm going to write a screenplay called The Last 100. It's about the last 100 AAs. It takes place in about 10 years, right around 2030. Don't worry about that, by the way, because global warming is going to extinct the species first. You don't have to worry about this. But provided we all survive that shit, I'm going to write this screenplay about the last 100 AA members who are all kind of burrowed in the internet all over the world, and they're kind of talking to each other by email about what happened to Alcoholics Anonymous and why it went away. And the reason is because of the traditions didn't get, we throw them away we read them while everybody's shuffling in. It's sort of like filler material, the 12 traditions. But if you're new here, those are the most important things we have. Those things are as important as the Bill of Rights are to the United States government, or the way the government operates in this country. So, I was in a dentist's office the other day, and I was looking at there was a magazine there with a certain movie star in the cover, and she was going to tell us about her life, and I flip it open, and there it is about, being sober in a 12-step program, and for an hour and a half. And now she's, telling the world about how she did it. It's all about how good things are for her. And I go to another meeting and somebody's bragging their politics in, that's sort of, and somebody else is shilling for some business in an AA meeting, and we have this endless thing about drug addicts and alcoholics. There is an AA pamphlet, which of course is not here. It's called Problems Other Than Alcohol, which is the definitive statement on the issue of drug addicts and alcoholics, and is written by Bill Wilson himself, and I'm not going to engage in that conversation after the meeting, but if you can find that pamphlet, it tells you who's allowed to be in AA and who isn't. Period. End of story. And if you're running a treatment center, we should read it. There, I've said it now. Try to do that lovingly. But if we don't keep the traditions, my friends, we are not going to have this thing. We are not going to have this. Somewhere right now on this planet, a baby's being born who's going to need us in 15, 20, 25, 30 years. And I would like Alcoholics Anonymous to be there when that baby arrives. So I exhort you, if you're new, I beseech you, I beg of you to, pay attention to what this thing is. There's pamphlets like Understanding Anonymity, and there's all kinds of, there's a lot of history here. It's really kind of interesting stuff, the way this thing came about. If you learn about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's a miracle that we... See, the thing about the traditions is the traditions allow us to survive our own membership. That's what the traditions protect us from ourselves, because they knew when they codified that, I think it was 1950 or something like that, 15 years or so after AA was founded, they codified the traditions in the form we have them now, and the reason they did that is because they knew what we were like. You know, there was to protect us from people like Bill Wilson, actually. I've always found it wonderfully ironic that Alcoholics Anonymous was founded by a con artist and a proctologist. It's very fitting. If you keep coming back long enough, you'll find out, you know, how appropriate those things are. Considering the demographics of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's I was a shy kid too once, remember? I really was, basically, and it may be hard for you to believe now. I was a shy kid. Shyness is a form of fear, like as is worry, as is, there's all kinds of, self-consciousness. All of those things are forms of fear. And the big book talks, the word fear goes all through the big book. It's what this thing is about. That is the beast, I call it, the bête noire. I grew up scared. I mean, I was probably scared in the womb. I was frightened in utero, and there was a reason for it. You hear some people come up here and kind of throw around these half-truths. There's a lot of folklore in Alcoholics Anonymous, things that are sort of like sometimes they're true, so therefore they're always true, like false evidence appearing real, right? That's one you hear, right? Fear, false evidence appearing real. Sounds good, right? Sometimes fear is real evidence appearing real, okay? If my Toyota Corolla stalls on the Amtrak train and the 410 to Yuma is coming around the bend, I better get out of the goddamn car. You know what I mean? That's real evidence. So be careful of those. Be careful of the half-truths in Alcoholics Anonymous. If you want a little intellectual fun over the years that you're here, and I hope you stay for years, you can kind of start looking for the paradoxes and the contradictions. Find all the places where the big book contradicts itself. There are a number of those. That'll keep you amused at night while you're reading the book. False evidence appearing real. That's one of the many, There are all kinds of things around here. Somebody glib said them from the podium. They sort of pass into the language uncritically, and we all just sort of accept them like, you're as sick as your secrets. Who says, Some of the sickest people in AA are the ones that get up here and divulge everything, Some things I just wish you'd keep a secret. But they're, I can't put into words what's said around here. So I guess I probably start telling my story, right? Well, I had my first drunk when I was in the front seat of a '57 Chevy with a girl named Joyce, who plied me with alcohol and then had her way with me. In an alley behind a funeral home in Detroit. And I was a relatively old guy. I was 19 years old. And I was relatively, aged for those two. But those two experiences were in tandem, okay? The first time for both, for each, right? Get your mind around that for a minute. I got drunk the first time, and I lost my virginity the same night. And I want to report to you that was the best night of my life. Before or since. I'm only kidding, honey. It was a sacramental evening, and my drug of choice is perfume. And alcohol just facilitated all of that, you know what I mean? There was a synergistic reaction, and all of a sudden, that particular night with Joyce in that '57, it wasn't '57, it was later than that. She had an old car. I'm not that old. Anyway, everything changed that night. No longer was I shy and self-conscious and worried about everything and insecure and feeling all of that crap that goes with coming from the kind of place that I did. Just trust me, when it was a reason why I was get back to what I said a minute ago. There was a reason why I was frightened as a kid. And I'm not going to turn this into an ACA meeting. I took care of all that at Warner and Wilshire at that meeting years ago. But there was a good reason to be frightened, and it was not in my imagination. There were some nights when it was like problematic whether you can get through the night alive. When you come from a place like that, fear is hardwired into your... Fear is not a character defect. It's a neurological reaction to a perceived threat. That's what it is. It's a biological reaction to the perception of a threat, period. The problem was that there were so many threats all the time that it was always a fear charge play, and I was always perceiving a threat because it was real. But that became an habitual way of reacting to life. And in my case, what I did was I challenged fear. I grew up in terms where I challenged it. I didn't plan for that to be, but I just kind of did. I kind of drifted into jobs that were dangerous. And, well, I didn't drift in. The first one, they kind of hired me. It was 1967, and they threw a war, and they invited a lot of people. And I didn't go to Vietnam, but I was an officer and a gentleman, and I was in an intelligence operation. I was one of those outfits where you didn't wear a uniform and did a lot of weird things on behalf of your country. And some of which I still can't talk about, even in a fifth step, because, there are laws against that. I am forbidden by law to talk about some of my story. And that sounds very cloak and daggerish and very James Bond. It's true, it was. And but it was also a time when I was doing things that were, how shall we put this, ethically questionable. Bullshit. It was more, I was doing things that were wrong on behalf of my government. I was ordered to. And you can, things that were just plain wrong. And I wasn't the only one. There was a whole lot of lying going on in those days, in the late 60s. Sometimes I hear people, who lived through the 60s. The 60s have become a buzzword, sort of like for a big party. And with our historical revisionism, we talk about, the 60s as if it was all just one big good time. Well, I want to assure you there are a lot of people, many of them in this room, right now, men of my age for whom the 60s were not a fucking party. All right? Some of us some of you guys know about that stuff. And I was in that, it was a painful time. I can't talk about it to this day without feeling some of that pain. The whole country was ripped in half, and it was ugly. And I drank. That's the time when my drinking progressed from the normal, I guess probably normal, if it ever was normal, but from the sort of basic rite of passage, male bonding, growing up sort of thing that young men do. It progressed from there, mutated from that into medicinal drinking. That's when I became an alcoholic, is when I started drinking medicinally. And you go over to the officers' club bar, and you could have about, in those days, a happy hour. You could get, as I recall, you could get a mixed drink for $0.25, and you could get a beer for $0.10. And so you could get pretty fucked up for a couple of bucks. It didn't take much. And the people I drank with in those days were fighter pilots and people like that, and they were all playing the macho game, playing that game that men do, at least men of our generation. It's sort of a variant on mine's bigger than yours. It was that whole thing about, how tough we all are, and somehow, the ability to drink great quantities of alcohol was regarded as a sign of manhood. If you couldn't drink, you weren't a man. In other words, those were the messages we got at that time, and you buy into them. So I could hold my own with anybody. I could drive everybody. I could drink everybody under the table and drive them home. I used to think it was kind of cool. I could drive drunken fighter pilots home at the end of the night. And nobody ever told me that that's one of the early warning signs of alcoholism. They didn't know about that stuff then. That's one of the symptoms of alcoholism, is the ability to drink a lot of booze with very little effect when you're young. And I wouldn't have listened anyway because it was working. If alcohol still worked for me the way it did then, I guarantee you I wouldn't be speaking here tonight. I'm not one of those people who say, this get thee behind me, Satan, kind of that sort of temperance movement attitude about it. I'm glad I had booze. I really am glad that at that time in history I had a lot of booze to drink, because somehow it made it palatable. One of the things that booze does, but alcohol has a lot of wonderful properties. And we don't say enough on behalf of alcohol around here, And I'm not encouraging anybody to go and try it out, but I mean, let's just be honest about it, okay? Why I drank it, it had a lot of wonderful properties. The major one was it was a fear killer, okay? Alcohol killed fear, okay? This is my alcoholism. Alcohol killed fear. End of story. If you grow up scared, you find something that kills fear, that, my friends, is magical. That is a spiritual experience. The other thing it did, and it did a lot of things. The human conscience is soluble in alcohol. Alcohol can sort of take the buzz off of that feeling that you get in the pit of your stomach when you're doing something wrong. It anesthetizes the conscience. Of course, it became an all-purpose drug for that purpose for a long time. And anyway, fast forward a few years, and the military, I became a cop, and I did a lot of things, and that were probably fear-challenging. Needing to prove to myself over and see. Nobody told me when I was young that the label I put on myself was coward. That's a heavy term for a male to lay on himself, but I believed that I was a coward because I was told I was. And I think I had something to prove. So I kept having to prove it over and over and over again that I wasn't a coward by challenging fear. I've known, in my lifetime, I've known a lot of heroes. I'm going to fast forward for a second. I'm drunk and sober. In the last 23 years I've been sober. I've been in a lot of situations professionally where have the opportunity to see heroism and, see it. And almost without exception, everybody I've known who's ever done anything really heroic was scared shitless when he did it. In fact, that's one of the standards for the Police Medal of Valor. You have to be frightened, to be a danger. You have to be aware of what you're doing and be frightened by it. But nobody told me that, because I believed that the mere fact that I felt this fear meant that I was a coward. The fact that I felt fear, this thing, the line in here about, we beg of you to be searching and fearless from the very start. That's nice. If you can be fearless from the very start, go home. We don't, if you can pull that one off, friends, then you're probably not an alcoholic. At least of my variety. Anyway, that stuff worked real good for a long time, and then it didn't work anymore. In the last 4 or 5 years of my drinking, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous the first time in 1974. I hated it with a passion. I really hated it. I thought I'd stumbled into something between us, kind of a cross between the Moonies and Est. A little Amway thrown in. And I hated it, and everybody's trying to save my soul, and and we had a lot of these really annoying people who were really virtuous. They'd found God in another, and now they're going to tell you about it. They were holy. They'd progressed from spirituality to holiness. You still see them all the time. This is a phenomenon. If you stay around for a long time, you'll notice this. Somewhere around a year and a half, sometime around the step 3, the windows between like a year and a half to about 4 years, a lot of people get sober, they get spiritual, and then they get holy. They get their virginity back. We restore their. I'm talking about people of both genders. And then they get real. We have these outbreaks of virtue periodically in AA where, fellow sluts like myself suddenly, they start getting holy again, and then if they survive that, they usually have an affair with a newcomer in their 5th year somewhere in there, and they get human again. Which I encourage, by the way. I'm not discouraging that behavior at all, but. If you're new here, please don't get holy on us. They think the boys stick with the boys and the girls stick with the girl. That's another one, right? Where does it say that? You hear that shit all the time. That's usually promulgated. Well, never mind. So the 13th step saved my life. It doesn't often get the good press that it deserves. It gets a lot of bad press around here, but not everybody's story was negative. If it hadn't been for the pardon the expression, for the ministrations of certain female members of Alcoholics Anonymous when I was new, I wouldn't be standing here tonight either, okay? And I'm not advocating that, I'm not pushing it, but I'm just telling you my story. That's certain, you know, I mean, there was a program of attraction. I didn't come here for the cookies, kids. Or for the toothless old guy. There was an old guy he was named Harry, would sit there at these meetings in Detroit. He didn't have any teeth, and he would sit there and he would say things like, the boys stick with the boys and the girls stick with the girls. And, you know, and he said, one night he said, you can't have sex for your first year. He made this proclamation, right? He had a year's sobriety. And then he talked about how drinking had made him, quote, impudent. Sure did. I didn't want what he had. I was afraid of catching what he had. Fortunately, I got glommed onto by a sponsor. A guy appointed himself my sponsor. The guy I was investigating. I was trying to put him in jail. Actually, he was an AA con man, and he wound up saving my life. He was a guy. It's a long story, but I'd come to meetings hoping he would screw up, so he'd say something I could take in front of the grand jury. And he found out who I was working on an organized crime unit then, and he thought it was so funny when he found out who I was that he appointed himself my sponsor. And he had a red Gail knew him, my wife knew him. He was the best man at our wedding. And he appointed himself my sponsor. He had a red Corvette. He had 19 years of sobriety then, and you'd never know because he was a madman, but he glommed onto me, and he had this red Corvette, and I was between marriages, and he, you know, was between engagements. So we go cruising the meetings together in his red Corvette looking for girls. And he would say things like, well, never mind what he'd say, but he taught me there was another way of looking at all of that. Let's put it that way. And he also taught me about God. He taught me about spirituality, what little I know about it. I hated that idea of God. I didn't like it either. I didn't like the word. But he would, I'd watch him with newcomers. He had this Irish face. He was a used car salesman in the Detroit ghetto. Okay, that's what his, you know, I mean, that's what his spiritual world was. But he had a thing with newcomers, particularly tough newcomers. He specialized in 12-stepping tough guys, you know, because he was one, an ex-convict. And he would, if he see a newcomer or some woman who was really depressed looking, he'd go over and he'd turn on this Irish charm, and he'd find something nice to say about, like, hey baby, that's really a nice looking sweater. You know, and she's just off the bricks, and this is the first time anybody's noticed her in a while. You know what I mean? And she would light up, you know, and she'd be back the next night. He'd turn on that charm, and she'd be back the next night. And I watched him do that, and I learned from him what it means by a program of attraction. If you want to turn off, you know, you'd start preaching at me. You know, I'm sorry, I don't like people. People get up the podium and they start lecturing you. It's a temptation. You've been sober a while, you know something, so you want to lecture people. You know, please don't lecture me from an AA podium. You know, I just did some tonight, but forgive me. And you know, they use things like "you must," or "we are." They make the collective statement. We are this way. We are that way. Fuck you. You know what I'm like. Don't talk, and I don't listen like that. That's when I turn off and I start fantasizing, you know, about somebody in a room. That's when somebody starts talking. Somebody's pissing you off in AA by that. It's a good time to start indulging your fantasies. When I was 3 months sober, I met the 3 months sober. I met the woman I'm still with, who was the finest human being I've ever met. She was a deputy DA at that time, right out of law school, and I was a detective, and we were working together. This is a true story. We were working together on an organized crime case, and we fell in love with each other, and we're still together. It's been, next week it'll be 22 years, next Saturday night, 22nd anniversary. That person right there. She loves me even though I'm a slut pig. She understands me. One other thing I will leave you with, you know, I mean, my theme, if I have one for people who are new, is this. There was an old guy, and I'll just pass this along to you and shut up. There was an old guy when I was new named Sam, and he was a cop. He was a sergeant in the 5th Precinct Narcotics Unit. This was in Detroit, when we had the highest crime rate in the world at that time, and he was working in one of the toughest precincts in the world. And his job was, he was a sergeant who led the raids. And he was a tough guy. And I came to the AA, and there he was. I didn't know he was sober in AA. He had like 12 years or something. And in the meetings, he was entirely different than he was on the street. He was very gentle, and his whole approach to newcomers is one of kindness and gentleness, which, by the way, is what I think we should do with newcomers. And his message to those of us who were new was, get sober, work the steps, give it away to somebody else, and get yourself a dream. You know, find a dream. Find something you really care about, you know, and do it. Work at it. That you were giving you the keys to the handcuffs. That's what he said. It was the metaphor I related to, since I carried handcuffs at the time. Giving you the 12 steps are the keys to the handcuffs. You can go out and fashion a life for yourself that you want to live. You know, find something that you really want to do with it, because you only come this way once, as far as I know. And I listened to that. My particular fantasy was someday I'd like to live someplace where the weather was nice and wasn't, you know, this snow and sleet and crap and all that stuff, and live somewhere on the beach, somewhere where it was warm, and I get paid to write about this stuff that I was living in now. Okay, that was a long time ago, and that's exactly the way I live now. I now live the fantasy I had when I was new, because I, wanted to be a writer, so I went out and did the things one needed to do. I worked at it hard, with Gail's blessing and help. And one of my observations of alcoholics has been that as a class, we sell ourselves too short. There are a lot of very talented and very intelligent people in this room right now, and a lot of people with great potential. And if you stay sober and you do what I just suggested, you can have a life that you want to live. I mean, a guy, my sponsor, asked me the other day, what's God's will? It's like, what's God's will? I don't know. God's will, you want to find out what God's will is, let's start by asking yourself the following questions. What talents do I have? What gifts do I have? What passions do I have? What do I care about? What pisses me off about the world I live in? What needs to be fixed? What can I do to make a difference? Where can I use my gifts to contribute? How can I make a difference in the world I'm living in? The 12 steps are all about, carrying the message to somebody else. They're about giving it away. It's about contribution. And I think the sine qua non of lasting happiness is contribution. Everybody I know, I've known a lot of people, but everybody I know who has any kind of peace of mind and contentment is somebody who in one form or another is making a contribution to the world. And we start with carrying the message to the newcomer. That's where it starts, but it doesn't finish there. So my exhortation to you, if you're new here, is, work the steps, carry the message, give it away to somebody else, and get yourself a dream. So thank you very much.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.